Hi, welcome. New video. Great. I thought it'd be cool to branch out my content. Something different from a regular showcase that I generally do all the time. I figured that this would be kind of cool, to give my own thoughts and impressions on the refines and new units and whatnot in one big video for your consuming pleasure. As far as I can tell, it's not really a very saturated area. It's really mainly 2-3 people kind of covering this type of stuff, and I thought I'd throw my hat into the ring. Maybe it'll catch on, maybe it won't, we'll see what happens. But in any case, I figured I'd go over each of the refines that we got this month, as well as the new ninja units, and show off some builds, recommendations, yada 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 yada. And I guess we could just get started. First up, we have Legendary Marth with his Exalted Falchion refine, which kept the bonus doubler effect and added Spectrum Unity. This means in turn that no matter what buffs or penalties are on him, he will always get a stat bonus. So for example, if he gets +6 visible attack, he gets the bonus from bonus doubler. If that gets panicked, he still gets the +6 from Unity. Although that's not really the end of his refine, as he can also get Spectrum 8, which just allows him to catch up to modern sorties and units in general, which is just fantastic. The Spectrum 8 alongside the Unity and bonus doubler means he's just going to be a massive stat ball. Kind of like Fallen Ike in a sense, especially with the Spectrum 8 he gets from his weapon. He ends up getting really bulky, all things considered. And that's not the end to his update, because he also got Binding Shield 2 and Shining Emblem. Binding Shield 2 is now just Fire Sweep against everyone if he at least has 5 more speed than the foe. This, on top of the fact that he also grants a guaranteed follow-up attack, means he's more often than not going to be doubling every foe in his path, provided that they don't have any form of stat neutralization like lulls or just dulls or whatever. But what makes it really nice is that Shining Emblem allows it to be self-sufficient, as it grants +6 to everything at the start of the turn. As a result, you don't really have to run some sort of rally on an ally to get his bonuses going, because he'll just grant it to himself. And given that penalties are still fairly frequent on Aetherites, you'll more than likely be able to take advantage of his PRF all the time. The only thing I don't personally care for is the fact that he doesn't have Slang, which means Shining Emblem is a 2 cooldown special, which is fine if you don't want to use him for arena purposes, because you can at least run Times Pulse if you wanted to, but for Arena, you can't really do that because he needs a 300 SP skill if he wants to score to his best potential. Speaking of which, because he has a PRF B passive, he's able to score 180 BST with our Dual Infantry 4, which is very important. It may not be the highest by today's standards, but considering he's also a legendary hero, that's fairly good to have around. Overall, Legendary Marth is really good. If there's anything holding him back, it's probably his legendary status, just because of the fact that Aether Raids is inconsistent when it comes to those types of blessings. So if you do plan on using them, make sure it's on Fire Season, obviously. For Legendary Marth's build, I have one Aether Raid set, I have one that's mixed Aether Raids, one general PvE, and then I have one for Arena. The Aether Raids offense build will consist of Shining Emblem, Exalted Falchion Refine, Attack Speed Unity, Binding Shield 2, Joint Drive Attack, and Steady Breath. Steady Breath is important if you want him to trigger Shining Emblem on the first hit, as he does not have Slang. Attack Speed Unity is a really good option, as it can stack with his weapon and grant even more stats and bonuses, provided that there is a penalty on him. It also is really good on Light Season against units like Not, who have Attack Speed Menace on them. You could also run Attack Defense Unity on him if you want to make him into a melee specialist, which is also fairly important. You don't necessarily have to, because he does have Unity built into his weapon, but if you wanted to prioritize one or the other, Attack Speed Unity is good for dealing more damage with Shining Emblem, while Attack Defense Unity is better for melee tanking in general, but you can't go wrong with either option. Binding Shield 2 is there just to prevent the foe's counterattacks, as well as guaranteeing his own follow-up attacks, which is very nice to have, as there are going to be a lot of foes in Aether Raids that have guaranteed follow-up attacks, or just simply fast. So if Marth can outspeed by 5 points, then he's not going to have an issue doubling, as well as preventing doubles from the foe. Because chances are, if they have a guaranteed follow-up attack, they're slow anyway, so you can always prevent their double with Binding Shield 2. And then because Shining Emblem provides visible buffs as is, there aren't really that many options for his C passive that he would want. So you could always go with Joint Drive Attack, as that's just a flat +4 extra attack. Or you could go with Joint Drive Speed if you have that. Either option's good. For his second set, it's mainly the same, but instead of having Attack Speed Unity or Attack Defense Unity, you have Distant Stance. This can allow him to act as an Omni Tank, and granted, being an Omni Tank in Aether Raids at the moment isn't necessarily the best, because of the fact that you have stuff like Far Save and Near Save that allows you to leverage in one role or the other. But it's still an option nonetheless because of his Unity skill. And even if you don't use this in Aether Rage, you could still use this as a general PvE build. There isn't really much else to say on it, it does the job. Unities aren't necessarily as good in PvE because there aren't as many penalties or panic as there are in Aether Raids. So Distant Stance might even be the better option anyway. And then finally we have his Arena build, which is basically just skills that score really well. You have Rally Plus, you have R Dual Infantry 4, you have Joint Drive Attack. All of these, you're going to need skills that score at least 300 SP, and then a Rally Plus of your choice. Doesn't matter which one, I just chose Rally Attack Speed Plus because that's the basic one. R Dual Infantry 4 pushes him up to 175 BST because he's a legendary hero. And Binding Shield 2, which scores 300 SP, can push him up to 180. Flashing Blade 3 is there, so every time he initiates combat, he can trigger his special. If you want Sustain and want to use him in the enemy phase too, you could always give him Mystic Boost too. You have flexibility with his Sacred Seal. I personally like Flashing Blade 3 more because I like having the ability to trigger his special more consistently. But you could pretty much go with anything you want. Next we have Legendary Tiki, who got a fairly basic refine, but the effects present are pretty good. She still keeps her distant counter, she has dragon effectiveness, and now with her refine she gets Spectrum 4, and she inflicts an attack penalty on the foe based on the amount of visible defense or res she has. This pairs really well with Everyone too, as not only does it buff Tiki for 6 defense and res at the start of the turn, but also it acts as a far save skill with Spectrum 4. So not only does it synergize with Distant Counter, but it also synergizes with her refine. So no matter what, as long as she has With Everyone 2 active, she'll guarantee debuff the foe for 9 attack. However, you have to worry about the fact that lulls exist and panic exists. If she gets hit by attack defense lull or maybe a speed res lull or whatever, then it's going to cut down significantly on the amount of attack the foe is inflicted by. And then panic just outright removes it. Thankfully, she does come with Select Fighter, so you don't have to worry all too much about panic in that sense, but if you want to inflict an attack penalty on the foe, then you will have to avoid it somehow. In any case, the Spectrum 4 she gets from her Far Save on top of the Spectrum 4 she gets from her Refine, she just becomes a really solid stat ball. And you'll see it in these builds right here. Because With Everyone 2 is just Far Save with Spectrum 4, you obviously want to focus on ranged foes. So for her first set, we have Divine Mist with her Refine, Swap, Glimmer, Distant Defense 4, Slick Fighter, With Everyone 2, and Distant Defense 3. Double Distant Defense is always good because it just stacks her defense and res against ranged foes, and Distant Defense 4 just neutralizes any bonuses that the foe might have to their stats, which means she may more than likely be able to tank even more, especially with the With Everyone 2 buff that she gets. She ends up being really bulky overall. So in this set, she has 40 defense and 35 res with the Ascendant Floret. So provided that let's just say the foe has a -9 attack penalty, that's 49 defense, 44 res, and then you add the visible buffs that she has with everyone, that's an additional 6 to each stat. Then you add the Spectrum 8, then the Distant Defense 4 and Distant Defense 3. It's a lot. It's just a lot of defense and res against ranged foes. Of course, if you want something more offensive, you could go with Fierce Breath and Dragon Breath instead with Attack Res Form as your Sacred Seal. Fierce Breath is not only good for granting extra attack, but it also allows you to trigger Glimmer on the first hit, which also synergizes really well with Dragon's Wrath because it not only has damage reduction on the first hit, but on the first hit, it also provides extra damage based on the amount of attack Tiki has. And Attack Res Form is also just generally good for mixed tanking, so you really can't go wrong with Attack Res Form. You can always go with Attack Defense Form too if you want. And then finally, because she is a legendary hero, you can always build her for Arena. and pretty much she just has skills that score fairly well. She has Rally Plus, she has Aether, Fierce Breath, Slick Fighter, yada yada yada. It's pretty much her base kit with a Rally Plus and Aether. It's pretty cheap for the most part. The only 500 SP special that she can get is Aether because she's a dragon, which locks her out of Gale Force and Ruptured Sky. But that's fine because you can have access to sustainability as a result. Next, we have Legendary Hector. Now, instead of having to be within 2 spaces of an ally, now it's up to 3, which is much more flexible. However, because he is in armor, there's a good chance that he would be near allies anyway, so it's not that much of an upgrade in my opinion. That being said, the other part of his base effect inflicts -5 attack defense on the foe and prevents follow-up attacks from said foe, which is pretty strong. Now, if you take into consideration his Refine, which inflicts an additional -5 attack defense on the foe and reduces damage taken by 40% on the first hit, you can kind of think of him as a mini Gustav in a sense, where he's taking less damage overall on the first hit, and then he could always retaliate back with a strong special, provided that he has Steady Breath, and depending on whatever else he has in his kit. So the damage reduction combined with the -10 attack and defense on the foe not only allows him to tank many more foes in the process, but allows him to deal way more damage just in general. And the fact that he's in armor means he can use Savior to meet his proximity condition. That being said, you could always stick with Osseous Pulse 2, as it is a Tactics Times Pulse, which can also open avenues for Gale Force and instant bonfires depending on what you want to run on him. However, it's not necessary on him, especially if you just want to use him as a near save unit. He does that very, very well. The only problem you'll find with him is that because he is slow, any foe with a guaranteed follow-up attack has the potential to double him in the process. Overall, he just becomes very tanky, and the additional defense buff on the foe will allow him to deal much more damage in general. For his first hit, we're going to be taking advantage of Near Save. Near Save alongside Attack Defense Unity and Crafty Fighter, as well as Steady Breath, means he's able to trigger Ignis on his second hit, provided that there isn't any guard effects present on the foe. Crafty Fighter is also really good against just preventing specials from the foe in general. Attack Defense Unity is good in case he gets hit by a penalty and can allow him to deal even more damage. Thunder Armad's already providing an additional +10 attack defense and res essentially means he has a lot of defense. And even though it won't add to his overall Ignis damage, the amount of defense he's gaining from attack defense, near save, and steady breath means he's going to be dealing a lot of damage in general. Of course, if you want to take advantage of Osseous Pulse 2, you can run him with Ninja Mesakari and Gale Force. And while it may seem like a bad idea to stack speed on him, you do have to keep in mind that making speed checks is much easier than making attack checks these days, especially since a lot of foes on defense tend to be more on the slower side with guaranteed follow-up attacks, and it's not too hard to stack speed as is. The build you see right now is without any speed blessings or blessings in general, so this is before any sort of like speed bonus from Plumeria or Peony, or even a speed penalty on the foe. So anything after this initial 33 speed, not including Blade Session, would actually allow him to trigger Flashing Blade 4 fairly consistently. It wouldn't be too bad. Although I would definitely understand if you have concerns with it. I personally find that it's not that bad of a set at all. And then of course, he's a legendary, so you can always use him in arena modes. Slap on a Rally Plus, give him Aether, and keep his base kit, and you're good. Not much else to say on it. You could also run Steady Breath with Osseous Pulse 2, which means he could trigger Aether in the first combat he enters on the second hit. It's fairly simple. Next we have Linus, who basically got Sparking Tome, but for speed and defense as his refine. Essentially means depending on the stats specified in the weapon, the foe cannot buff those stats, and if they do, they get a penalty towards those stats, which means there's a good chance that Linus is going to have a very easy time doubling. The base effect also comes with Slaying and an additional +5 attack and speed, so he's dealing even more damage and he's doubling more often. Effectively, Fang Basilicos is giving a 10 attack speed stat swing for Linus, and the Slaying effect can also go a long way into helping Linus with Gale Force, as it will turn into a 4 cooldown special, and if he doubles with Flashing Blade and both of those trigger, and there isn't any guard present, he'll Gale Force. Simple as that. Heavy Blade is also an option if you want to run that, but I find that because he's inflicting speed penalties on the foe, he'll have an easier time triggering Flashing Blade than Heavy Blade. But you can run either. In any case, he's fairly solid. I would have personally liked if he also got an attack debuff as well, but you can't argue with minus speed and minus defense because he ends up getting plus 10 attack and speed that way. And for his kits, we're basically going to be focusing on Gale Force because that's pretty much what he excels at. We have Fanged Basilicos, Repositioned Gale Force, and Flashing Blade 4 on every set. For the first two, we also have Wings of Mercy, and depending on the type of Gale Force you want to run, you can either run Joint Drive Speed and Blade Session or Times Pulse and Quicken Pulse. Joint Drive Speed is just good for securing more Flashing Blade checks, and Blade Session is good for overall attack and speed, while Times Pulse and Quicken Pulse can allow him to trigger Gale Force more securely as it will become a 2 cooldown special. And as for his third build, he has Null Follow-Up, Times Pulse, and Quicken Pulse. Pretty much the same thing as his second build, but instead of Wings of Mercy for Gale Force chaining, he has no follow-up, so he can secure doubles, and he can run a 2 cooldown Gale Force. Granted, you don't necessarily need to run Times Pulse and Quicken Pulse. You can always go with attack speed solo and another C slot, whether that's Menace or Smokes. Either one is fine, since it's general PvE, but the idea is that you just have options. Next we have Helbindi, who kept his original odd wave effect, but now instead of it being +4, it grants +5, and it can trigger it within a certain range of the foe. This limits the amount of C passives he can effectively use because a lot of C passives tend to focus on visible buffs, whether that's rouses, menaces, oaths, etc, etc. Anyway, his base effect was also updated to grant +5 attack and inflict -5 attack on the foe, provided that the condition is met. And the Refine does the same thing, but with the additional benefit of preventing follow-up attacks from the foe. This can make him extremely tanky. You're effectively getting +10 attack, defense, and res on Helbindi, who's already fairly min-maxed as is, so he's pretty much going to be taking less damage overall and outputting a lot more in the process. That being said, because he is really slow, foes that can make guaranteed follow-up attacks will just bypass the impact effect, and since Helbindi is too slow to double naturally, he can't prevent them from doubling as is, and he'll have to rely on Quick Riposte for his own doubles. But provided that he's also really min-maxed, he should be able to keep himself within the Quick Riposte range fairly well. As for his builds, there's 2 for Aether Raisin and 1 for general PvE. The first 2 builds are pretty much the same, with Bylester, Reposition, Ignis, Quick Riposte, Joint Drive Attack, and Steady Breath. But for his A passive, you have the option between Sturdy Stance 3 and Attack Defense Unity. Sturdy Stance 3 is good for guard effects on the foe, as well as the additional +6 it grants to his attack and defense, while Attack Defense Unity is good for preventing penalties on himself. And given that Bylester also provides visible buffs, there's a good chance that if he gets panicked, then he can just rely on Attack Defense Unity to bring him back up. And the reason we want Quick Riposte is obviously because he can't double naturally. Joint Drive Attack is good in general just because of the fact that he has high attack. And Steady Breath is going to be really good with Quick Riposte, so he can trigger Ignis every single combat on the second hit. As for his PvE build, he has Bylester, Reposition, Noontime, Distant Counter, Quick Riposte, Joint Drive Attack, and Defense Res solo. You can switch out Defense Res solo with Mystic Boost if you really want to. There isn't really that bad of an option for his Sacred Seal as long as it increases his overall bulk. Distant Counter is going to be perfectly fine. You can also run Distant Stance if you have that available to you. Since general PvE, he's going to want to attack all sorts of foes if you're using him as a carry. Quick Riposte is obvious because you want him to double. And then Joint Drive Attack again, so he can end up dealing a lot more damage. Next, we have Kaze, who honestly got a really solid refine overall. Kaze's Needle effectively grants an assortment of effects that turns him into a really solid area of effect spammer. He has Slaying, he has Flashing Blade 4, and if his conditions are met, he can get an additional +8 attack, speed, and res during combat. His visible attack is still relatively low, so area of effect skills won't necessarily deal as much as they should, but if you are running double life and death, it will make up for that fact. And here's what I really like about his weapon. Because it has Flashing Blade 4 built into his weapon, he is one of the most consistent area of effect spammers in the game. And that's all because he can bypass guard effects while being able to sack life and death in his A passive and Sacred Seal. This is really important because if he ends up getting hit by Sturdy Stance 3 or anything with guard, then it's going to mess up his ability to run Special Spiral and Area of Effect specials. So having Flashing Blade 4 in his weapon is really strong. What's also really nice is his low HP, because that can allow him to be infantry pulsed much easier, and can charge his Area of Effect special really fast. And because he has Slaying in his weapon, he doesn't have to worry about having too many infantry pulses on the field. Overall, he's a really fantastic demote now, for what it's worth. You have a lot of options for dagger units. If you're looking for a budget unit to run Area of Effect specials, absolutely go with Kaze. For the first 2 builds, we're mainly going to be focusing on Area of Effect specials, and as previously mentioned, he can run Life and Death in both his A passive and Sacred Seal, because he doesn't have to worry about guard effects since he has Flashing Blade 4 in his weapon. Special Spiral and Time Pulse is there, because he wants to constantly use Blazing Wind, and Time Pulse helps him charge it up initially, while the second set works with Disarm Trap, so even if you don't have Special Spiral present, it'll allow him to use Blazing Wind reliably without the risk of traps. Of course, you can always smite him in if you wanted to, but there's always a risk versus reward to that system. So if you want something more secure, you can run Disarm Trap. And then for his general PvE build, we have Iceberg, Mirror Impact, Special Spiral, Joint Drive Attack, and Attack Speed Solo. Because his res stat is actually fairly high, and the fact that he gets +8 to his res stat from his weapon, he can stack it really high with Mirror Impact as well, and end up doing a lot of Iceberg damage. That on top of the fact that he can also run Attack Speed Solo and Joint Drive Attack for more additional damage output, it's really solid. Not much else to say on it, it's just fairly good overall. Next we have Kliff, who gets essentially +9 to every stat when both conditions are met. He also gets a mini Ruptured Sky based on the foe's attack stat, and he gets Guard in his weapon, which, with all these factors combined, makes him extremely tanky and difficult to deal with. You can kind of think of him like a Blue Henry, except he has a stat line. The only thing he may struggle with is high-res foes, because his attack stat isn't necessarily the highest, but given how much of a stat ball he is, he also really shouldn't have any issues dealing with foes in general, as they probably won't be able to deal much damage to him himself. It's a fairly basic refine, but it pretty much does the job. Because Kliff ends up with a lot of mixed bulk, you can actually run him as a null counter disrupt tank in Aether 8, which is really solid, with double distant defense, joint distant guard, null counter disrupt, and moonbow. He ends up getting a lot of defense and res against ranged foes, and you could always run him with a near save unit as well to make up for the fact that he can't counter melee units. Of course, if you want to run something that allows him to counterattack all sorts of foes, you can always swap out Distant Defense for Close Foil, give him no follow-up, Defense Res Menace, and Attack Speed Solo. Close Foil actually doesn't counteract his ability to make his attack check against the foe since it's at the start of combat, while Close Foil is during combat. Meanwhile, you also have no follow-up, which allows him to pretty much secure his own doubles and prevent guaranteed follow-up attacks, and since he's really fast as is, he won't really be struggling to double. And Defense Res Menace is a really solid skill for not only increasing his overall damage output, but also increasing his bulk. You don't really want to run Attack Res Menace because of the fact that you want the foe to have as much attack as possible, especially with the mini Ruptured Sky that his weapon has built into it. You can also run Attack Speed Solo for more doubling and offensive prowess. And finally, if you want to focus on something that's a bit more player phasey, whatever that means, you can give him Iceberg with Flashing Blade 4, no follow-up, and Times Pulse with Attack Speed Solo. Times Pulse will turn Iceberg into a 2 cooldown special, and Flashing Blade 4 will allow him to trigger Iceberg in every combat provided that he doubles, and he should be able to double with no follow-up present. And given that he gets +9 to every stat, he effectively has 42 res to work with before any sort of visible buffs or spurs or any sort of support. And he ends up doing fairly well. And finally, for this refined batch, we have Summer Tana, who basically got the Halloween Noe effect, except it works for allies. It grants attack speed +5 during combat and has innate joint drive attack and speed. As a result, you can also use her as a support unit. Personally, I find that the guidance effect isn't nearly as good as it may seem, because chances are it may not come into play all too much. You could always run a hit and run set with it, but I find that the application of the guidance is way too gimmicky for you to take advantage of. However, that's just how I feel about it. I may be completely wrong about it, but in any case, the refine isn't that bad. It can definitely have its applications for sure, but I find that it's definitely the weakest one of the batch. And for her 3 builds, we're mainly going to be focusing on Aether Raid's defense and 1 build as a support. For her first build, we have her PRF, we have Moonbow, we have Aether Raid's defense attack speed 3, speed res Far Trace, speed res Rhine, and Blade Session. This can basically allow her to output a lot of damage, since she'll be able to double more often than not, provided that the foe doesn't have any ability to negate her double, and she gets a lot of attack from her weapon as well. The reason we're using her on Aether Raid's defense is because this is probably where you're going to be able to take advantage of her mobility the most, since you'll want her to be within a certain range of the foe. You could also run Windsweep as her B slot because of the fact that she does get a lot of speed, and she may not kill anyway with 1 attack or 2 attacks. So if you want the security of having the guidance effect, Windsweep is probably your best bet. Of course, if you want something that allows her to tank a bit more in the player phase, you could give her Sturdy Impact with attack res Far Trace and attack res Rhine with attack defense 4. It may seem kind of dumb to stack up her defense, but provided that a lot of foes on offense tend to target defense, especially with Omni tanks, while not necessarily present as much, can still be an issue. This can allow her to stack her defense much higher, as Sturdy Impact grants an additional 10, attack res Far Trace and Rhine can grant an additional 7, and attack defense form can grant an additional 3 to 7 depending on how many allies are nearby. So it adds up really fast. And of course, because she has Joint Drive attack and speed in her weapon, you can always use her as a support unit. The problem with Tana in general as a support unit is that she has no access to reliable support B passives, because her stat line isn't necessarily the best when it comes to support. She can always run Joint Drive attack and drive speed 2 for additional attack and speed stacking. Life and Death 4 can also be there if you want to soak attack and speed penalties such as chills or shrines. And then you also have an attack speed link, which is just good for stacking overall attack and speed. And that's pretty much all the refunds. Personally, I really like legendary Marths. I like Tikis, I like Kazes. I pretty much like all of them. I don't really have any problem with most of them, to be honest. In any case though, we can move on to the new units. First up, we have Ninja Igrene, who has solid offenses of 43 base attack and 38 speed. She has flyer perks, she can run Windsweep effectively because she has Brave in her weapon, she has the Halloween Noe effect of being able to teleport within 2 spaces of an ally, she lacks any semblance of bulk, so you may have to have her kill on the first 2 hits, which may not be that hard considering her base attack is relatively high, even though her weapon is only 9 might, and beyond that, she can honestly be a really spooky Aether Raid's defense unit because of the teleportation, similar to Halloween Noe, except she can actually do damage. You will probably have a comparison to Ninja Lin, who is still arguably better, not only because she has a Gale Force duo skill, but because Ninja Lin also has Slang in her weapon, which allows her to consistently trigger 2 cooldown specials, as opposed to Igrene, who needs to run Heavy Blade if she wants to trigger a special on the second hit. In any case though, we still have 3 builds for her. 2 mainly focusing on Aether Raid's offense, and then 1 focusing on Aether Raid's defense. We have Nabata Kunai, Reposition, Moonbow, Life and Death 4, Windsweep, Attack Defense Rhine, and Heavy Blade. The reason we're running something like Attack Defense Rhine instead of something like Speed Defense Rhine is because we want to secure the ability to trigger specials. So having the attack penalty on the foe, while also having defense penalties on the foe, can allow her to secure kills more often. You can also run attack speed run if you really want to secure more Windsweep checks, but chances are you're going to really want to prioritize her damage output in general. For Aether Raid's offense, we also have Fury 4 with Disarm Trap, with the same attack defense Rhine and Heavy Blade. Similar reasons to the first build, the reason we have attack defense Rhine is because we want to secure Heavy Blade checks. And Fury 4 with an HP Bane can allow her to fall into the Wings of Mercy range much faster. And then Disarm Trap at least allows her to reliably initiate on foes if there are traps present. And then finally we have something for Aether Raid's defense. We have pretty much the same weapon, special, and A passive, but we also have Life and Death 3 as her Sacred Seal, and we have Speed Defense Rhine, as we aren't necessarily focusing on Heavy Blade checks now. We're focusing on the ability to double and prevent the foe from counterattacking. Windsweep will secure that ability, provided that there isn't any null counter disrupt present. And then double Life and Death is just good for our overall damage output. Overall, really solid. I feel like she can be a really big sleeper hit on Aetherite's defense. But at the time of this recording, the units aren't even out, so for all I know, she can end up being really, really meta on Aetherite's defense. Next we have Ninja Shinon. He is fairly generic, all things considered, because he doesn't really have a PRF to call for his own, but because he is a bow, he has a lot of weapons to work with. His offenses are actually really, really, really good at 40 base attack and 43 base speed, with super boons in both stats. He's also infantry, so he has infantry perks such as Times Pulse, No Follow-Up, etc, etc. It will still be harder for him to stand out since he doesn't have a PRF, but as a unit, he's still an offensive powerhouse. And as for the builds, we have plenty of options, to be honest. I only put 3, but you have a lot more you can work with. For the first build, we're keeping his base Ninja Yumi, since Brave Effect without a speed penalty can allow him to run Wind Sweep effectively. He can run Deadeye with Life and Death 4 and Times Pulse and Flashing Blade, so every time he initiates combat, the second hit will allow him to trigger Deadeye, provided that there aren't any guard effects present. The second build is mainly taking advantage of Plaguing Bow since he doesn't necessarily have the worst mixed bulk, but it's not necessarily the highest. That being said, Plaguing Bow does stack a lot of attack, defense, res, so it can actually make him deceptively bulky, especially with Mirror Stance 3 providing guard and attack res solo in the Sacred Seal. You can actually become a fairly decent ranged tank. No Counter Disrupt is obviously there because you want to be able to bypass staves and Wind Sweep in general, and then you have Joint Drive Attack for just more damage output. And then for his PvE build, we have Candle Wax Bow with Reposition and Deadeye, Fury 4, Desperation, and Double Savage Blow. Candle Wax Bow with Fury 4 allows him to fall into the Desperation range after the first combat, which is really, really strong when you think about it, for at least for PvE purposes. You also have Double Savage Blow, which is there because since he is a colored bow, he may struggle to go up against certain blue units, so the chip damage can pay off in the end if he's able to output enough damage with the chip damage. But in any case, it's still a fairly solid PvE build, but you could still also go with Ninja Yumi in the first build, since it also has applications pretty much anywhere. Next we have Ninja Male Corrin, who scores 185 BST with the first merge. He's also a demote, so he's also easy to merge, and if you want a really solid lance unit for arena, he's the go-to unit. Although it may be kind of tough to merge him because he has special spiral fodder, so hard to say what you want to do with him. But in any case, he has relatively good stats all around, so he isn't limited to just using his Ninja Naginata. He can honestly run all sorts of lances because he has a really decent defense stat and an okay res stat with really good offenses. Also, because he's infantry, he has access to all sorts of infantry perks like damage reduction and Times Pulse. And as you'll see in a second, he's pretty much going to be taking advantage of all of the infantry perks you can get, as well as a couple lances here and there. For the first 2 builds, we're mainly focusing on Aether Raids, while the third build is going to be focusing on Arena since he scores 185 BST. For the first build, we have Its Curtains with Gale Force, Flashing Blade 4, Wings of Mercy, Times Pulse, and Blade Session. The A through S passives are pretty much going to be the same. The only difference between the first and second build is the weapon. Its Curtains, granting -2 cooldown with Times Pulse, allows Gale Force to become a 2 cooldown special, which is really, really significant if you think about it because of the fact that he doesn't have to worry about triggering Gale Force with Flashing Blade 4, especially against guard effects. Blade Station is there because it's just more attack and speed, and Wings of Mercy is just there for your Wings of Mercy beacon, since more than likely he'll be teleporting in rather than becoming the Wings of Mercy beacon himself. And you can also run Ninja Naginata instead of Its Curtains if you can't afford Its Curtains, because he can still double regardless, even with stuff that prevents doubles. So he can always run Flashing Blade 4 with Ninja Naginata and turn his 4 cooldown Gale Force into a 0 cooldown Gale Force. Only problem, if you run into guard effects, it's not going to trigger. So you will have to worry about that, but outside of that, it's pretty good. And then for Arena, we have Flowing Lance with a Rally Plus, Ruptured Sky, Distant Stance, Spurn, Rouse Attack Speed, and Attack Speed Solo. Because Flowing Lance requires him being solo, we're basically going to be giving him skills that benefit from being solo, such as Rouse Attack Speed and Attack Speed Solo. Ruptured Sky scores 500 SP, and it's easy to trigger, so that's always a good option. Although if you want sustainability, you could always go with Aether. Distant Stance grants even more res, so he can actually become fairly tanky, especially with Spurn, since he has enough speed for damage reduction. And that's pretty much your basic arena set. It's expensive, granted, but it's definitely effective. Finally on the banner, we have Ninja Female Corrin, who is basically the Green Reinhardt with true damage. She has a Gale Force Duo skill with very solid offenses of 41 attack and 40 speed. She has cavalry movement, so she can be really solid in Aether Raid's defense. She scores 195 BST since she's a duo unit, and because she has a brave tome and she's fast, she can run Wind Sweep very effectively and prevent foes from counterattacking and destroying her in the process, since her defenses are not that high. The only problem I find with her is that she doesn't have slang, so she'll need to run Heavy Blade in order to trigger a special on the second hit. But that being said, you can run Heavy Blade 4 as her A passive and stack even more true damage, as Heavy Blade 4 will grant plus 5, and the additional plus 7 she gets from her weapon will basically be plus 12 true damage per hit, which is really strong. Overall, she's basically a power creep Reinhardt with Gale Force, so that's fun. Anyway, her builds. We're going to be keeping her PRF because there's no reason to switch it out. It has Brave, it grants speed, it also grants true damage, so there's no reason to get rid of it. The first two builds, we're going to be keeping her PRF, Reposition Glimmer, and Heavy Blade. The only difference between the first set and the second set is that the first one is going to be focusing as an Aether Raid's defense set, and the second one's going to be focusing on Aether Raid's offense. For the first one, you have Wind Sweep and Fatal Smoke with Life and Death. Life and Death is there so she can secure Wind Sweep checks, and Fatal Smoke is obviously there because it prevents healing, which can be really, really strong in general against tanks. While the second build focuses on offense with Wings of Mercy beacons, so she'll be running Wings of Mercy with Joint Drive Attack and Blade Session, so she can potentially quad and deal a lot more damage with Glimmer and true damage. Finally, because she scores 195 in Arena, you might as well build her for Arena. You have her base Rally with Ruptured Sky, Heavy Blade 4, Wind Sweep 3, Attack Speed Menace, and Attack Speed Solo. Heavy Blade 4 is good just for securing Ruptured Sky triggers, while Wind Sweep is also good for preventing foes' counterattacks. Attack Speed Menace is also really nice for not only securing Heavy Blade checks, but also securing Wind Sweep checks, and she'll be able to output more damage in general, since it also buffs her attack and speed. And because she's also a cavalry unit, you might as well give her a solo skill, that being Attack Speed Solo, since she has the range. And then finally, we have our Tempest Trial unit, Ninja Shamir, who I'm surprised is free. I thought they put her on the banner. Anyway, she's basically Ninja Hannah 2. She scores 185 BSC with a merge and has a speed super boon. If you didn't build a Ninja Hannah, you might as well build Ninja Shamir if you're looking for a really good arena bot. She has solid stats all around, and she has the flexibility for any sort of build, and because she's infantry, she also has infantry perks, just like Corrin. The first two builds are mainly going to be focusing on Gale Force for Aether Raids, while the third one's going to be her Arena build. For her first build, we have Shuriken Cleaver, Reposition Gale Force, Flashing Blade 4, Wings of Mercy, Times Pulse, and Blade Session, while her second build has Slaying Axe with Quicken Pulse instead of Blade Session. Shuriken Cleaver with Flashing Blade 4 and Times Pulse can turn a 4 cooldown Gale Force into 0, provided that she not only doubles, but also if there aren't any guard effects present. There's also Slaying Axe Plus with Times Pulse and Quicken Pulse, which can turn Gale Force into a 2 cooldown special on the first turn, which can also be really, really solid if you want to trigger Gale Force much more securely. The only difference between Shuriken Cleaver and Slaying Axe is that Shuriken Cleaver is a guaranteed 2 attacks, while Slaying Axe may not allow you to attack twice. But in any case, you have both options. If you want to keep her weapon, there's no reason to get rid of it, but otherwise you can always go with Slaying Axe. And then for her Arena build, we have Deck Swabber, a Rally Plus, Ruptured Sky, Distant Stance, Spurring 3, Joint Drive Attack, and Attack Speed Solo. This is similar to the Ninja Male Corrin build that I had for Arena. They both score 185 BST, and they pretty much do the same thing. The only difference is pretty much their color and a bit of res here and there. But in any case, you have Deck Swabber, which inflicts penalties on the foe as long as she's solo. You have Attack Speed Solo and Distant Stance, which also increases her stats significantly. And then you have Spurn 3, because she's so fast, she can actually take advantage of it really, really significantly. And then you have Joint Drive Attack, which just helps with overall damage output, and Ruptured Sky. Fairly simple, expensive nonetheless. And that's pretty much the update. Those were all the refines, and those were all the ninja units. I hope that you enjoyed listening to this video or watching it or whatever you did. Let me know what you think down below. What refine do you like the most? Which ninja unit do you like the most? Are you going to be pulling for any of these units? Let me know. And since this was the first time I've actually done something like this, please give me some feedback if you have any. I would like to hear how I can improve on this. But in any case, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.